Jordan Cole was 34 years old, and on the night he got married, he couldn't sleep. He was a civil engineer, the kind of man who pressed his own tux, arrived an hour early to check the flowers, and tipped the venue coordinator out of his own pocket, the kind of man who built things to last. He and Amber had been together 4 years. He owned their home outright. He had saved for her ring without telling a single soul. That night, barefoot on the warm stone path of their wedding villa, he walked past his brother's window to get a glass of water. What he heard through that cracked window, his new wife's voice, breathless, unguarded, saying his brother's name, stopped him completely. Jordan stood in the garden of his own wedding night and didn't make a sound. Because the man his wife and his brother had spent 18 months underestimating had just heard everything he needed to hear, and he was already thinking. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. Through the early morning mist, Jordan Cole pulled into Bellhaven Villa's circular driveway exactly 1 hour before the first vendors were scheduled to arrive. The Spanish-style estate stood quiet and proud against the Virginia countryside, its ivy-covered walls still pearled with dew. He parked his meticulously maintained sedan and took a moment to straighten his tie in the rearview mirror. Inside his garment bag, his pressed tuxedo waited without a wrinkle. He'd spent 40 minutes on it the night before, working each seam with careful attention. It wasn't that he didn't trust the dry cleaner, it was simply that some things deserved personal attention. The venue coordinator, Sarah, looked surprised to see him so early. "Mr. Cole, we weren't expecting anyone for at least another hour. Just wanted to check on a few details," Jordan said, offering a warm smile as he reached for his wallet. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill for the extra sound system check we discussed. Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "Of course. I'll have Mike run it twice before the ceremony." Jordan nodded, already moving toward the courtyard where the florist's van had just pulled up. He'd specifically requested white roses with blue thistle for his mother's corsage. Paulette Cole deserved nothing less than perfect on her son's wedding day. The morning light strengthened as Jordan moved through his mental checklist. Each item received the same careful consideration he gave to his engineering project. Details mattered. Foundation mattered. He'd built his entire life on that understanding. 4 years of working his way through college, maintaining the scholarships that made it possible. 6 years climbing steadily at the infrastructure firm, earning respect through consistency and excellence. The down payment he'd saved for the house, refusing shortcuts, building something real. And now Amber, the final piece of the life he'd worked so deliberately to create. He remembered the day Devante met her. His brother had whistled low and said, "Now, that's a good one, little brother." Jordan had felt proud then. Proud that his steady, patient approach to life had led him to someone who could impress even his charismatic older brother. The morning progressed smoothly until Jordan remembered Amber's earring case, still sitting on his dresser at home. She'd left it there yesterday after trying on the complete outfit one last time. He drove the 20 minutes back to retrieve it, knowing she'd want those particular pearls for the ceremony. When he returned to Bellhaven, the bridal preparation suite was already busy with activity. He heard voices through the heavy wooden door, and then Devante's distinctive laugh, rich and easy, the same laugh that had filled family gatherings since they were kids. Jordan knocked, the earring case solid in his hand. The door opened to reveal Devante, looking relaxed in his groomsman's suit. "Hey, little brother," just giving the bride some pre-game hype. Behind him, Amber sat at the vanity in her silk robe, her smile bright and perfect in the mirror. "Jordan, you're not supposed to see me yet." "Just dropping off your earrings," Jordan said, handing the case to Devante. "Didn't want you to worry." "Always taking care of everything," Amber said, her voice warm. "Now shoo, it's bad luck." The ceremony itself was everything Jordan had planned for. Late afternoon sun streamed through the villa's arched windows as he stood at the altar, watching Amber glide down the aisle in vintage lace. She was breathtaking, exactly as he'd known she would be. His vows came straight from his heart, unpolished, but real. Amber, I promise to build our life with the same care and dedication I've built everything else, to be your foundation, to face whatever comes together, honestly and completely. Amber's vows were eloquent, clearly rehearsed to perfection. Jordan, you represent everything I've ever wanted in a partner. Your stability, your success, your devotion, they mean everything to me. I promise to be worthy of the life we'll share. She smiled at their gathered guests, 70 faces glowing with approval. Jordan watched her, memorizing every detail of this moment he'd worked so carefully to create. If he noticed that her smile seemed to stop just short of her eyes, he filed that observation away with all the other small details he naturally catalogued. After all, she was probably just nervous. This was their beginning. Everything that mattered lay ahead of them. The late afternoon light caught her engagement ring, the one he'd saved for month by month, telling no one until he could afford exactly what she deserved. It threw rainbow patterns across her white dress as she turned to face their friends and family. Every inch the radiant bride. The reception transformed Belhaven Villa's courtyard into something magical. Strings of fairy lights crisscrossed overhead like fallen stars, casting a warm glow over the 70 guests who filled the space with laughter and conversation. The air carried the rich scents of low-country cuisine, shrimp and grits, Carolina gold rice, and fresh-baked cornbread that reminded Jordan of Sunday dinners at his mother's house. Jordan stood near the dance floor, watching Amber chat with college friends. Her wedding dress caught the light perfectly, another detail that had worked out exactly as planned. The DJ was keeping the energy high but not overwhelming, reading the room with the skill Jordan had hoped for when he'd hired him. A gentle touch on his arm pulled his attention away. His mother, Paulette, stood beside him in her navy dress, the white and blue corsage perfect against the fabric. Her expression carried a weight that didn't match the celebration around them. "Baby, I need you to watch that brother of yours tonight," she said quietly, her voice barely carrying over the music. "Something feels off." Jordan laughed softly, squeezing her hand. "Mama, everything's perfect. You worry too much." But Paulette's eyes stayed serious. "I've watched that boy his whole life. I know when something's not right." Across the courtyard, Jordan noticed Rita, Amber's maid of honor, standing alone by the bar. She was staring at Amber with an expression that made him pause. Not the joy you'd expect from a best friend on a wedding day, but something heavier, something that looked almost like guilt. Before he could process that thought, she turned away and ordered another drink. The evening flowed smoothly into toasts and dancing. Jordan's uncles told embarrassing stories about his childhood. His college roommate praised his character, and Devante delivered a best man speech that had everyone laughing. Everything felt warm and right, exactly as it should be. At 9 p.m., Amber found him between songs. She pressed close, her perfume familiar. "I've got such a headache coming on," she said, rubbing her temple. "I need to lie down for a bit. I'll meet you in the suite in an hour." "Want me to come with you?" Jordan offered, but she was already shaking her head. "No, stay. Enjoy your uncle's stories. I just need some quiet time." She kissed his cheek and slipped away through the crowd, the white of her dress visible until she disappeared into the villa's shadows. Jordan stayed, being the gracious groom. His childhood friend Marcus insisted on another toast. His cousin Sarah wanted a dance. Time moved in that strange way it does during celebrations, both fast and slow at once. By 11 p.m., the party had wound down to just the diehards. Jordan made his way to their suite, expecting to find Amber rested and waiting. The room was empty, the bed untouched. He checked his phone. No messages. The sitting room down the hall was dark and quiet. He changed into sleep clothes, tried to read, checked his phone again. No messages. Midnight approached with a weight he couldn't quite name. Sleep wouldn't come. At 12:08 a.m., he decided to walk to the courtyard kitchen for water. The stone path felt cool under his bare feet as he moved through the shared garden. Half the fairy lights still glowed overhead, creating pools of soft light between deeper shadows. The night air carried the lingering warmth of a Virginia summer, heavy with the scent of jasmine. Jordan walked quietly, his mind drifting, until he passed Devante's suite. The window was cracked open about 2 inches. The old villa had no central air in the guest rooms, and the night was warm. At first, the sounds didn't register as anything specific. Then his body recognized what his mind wasn't ready to process. The heavy wooden bed frame creaked in a steady rhythm. A woman's breathing broke the night silence. Short gasps she was clearly trying to muffle without success. A man's low, controlled exhale followed. The sounds were unmistakable, primal, impossible to misinterpret. Jordan stood frozen, 6 feet from that window. His engineer's mind started counting seconds without conscious decision. 1, 2, 3. Then Amber's voice shattered through whatever restraint she'd been maintaining. Just for a moment, just one breathless moment, she called out Devante's name. Not in discovery, not in surprise. She said it the way someone says something they've said 100 times before. Natural, practiced, familiar. The bed frame kept its steady rhythm. Jordan stood motionless in the warm night air, counting to 60. His bare feet rooted to the stone path, his breath shallow and controlled. The fairy lights cast shifting patterns across the garden, while his world realigned itself around this new reality. At 60, he turned silently and walked back to the suite. In the bathroom, he filled a glass with water from the tap and drank it standing up, staring at his reflection in the mirror. Then he sat on the edge of the bed in complete darkness, breathing slowly and deliberately until his hands finally stopped shaking. Jordan sat motionless on the edge of the bed, his breathing deliberate and measured in the darkness. Each inhale lasted 4 seconds, each exhale the same, a technique he'd learned years ago for maintaining focus during difficult project presentations. Now it served a different purpose, helping him lock down the tremor that wanted to take over his hands. The digital clock on the nightstand cast a red glow. 1:17 a.m., his wedding night. The thought carried no joy now, only a cold clarity that spread through his chest like ice water. He would not react. Not yet. An engineer never started construction without a complete survey of the ground beneath the foundation. At 1:30 a.m., the door opened quietly. Amber's silhouette appeared in the dim light from the hallway. She paused when she saw him sitting there. "You're still up," she said softly, closing the door behind her. "Where were you?" Jordan kept his voice steady, curious rather than accusing. "Oh, I'm sorry, honey. I fell asleep in the sitting room." The lie flowed smooth and practiced from her lips. No stumble, no hesitation, no guilty rush to explain. "That headache really knocked me out." Jordan watched her move through the darkness, noting how she didn't turn on any lights, how she kept her movements fluid and controlled. This wasn't her first time crafting a careful return in the dark. "You feeling better now?" he asked. "Much better." She slipped into bed beside him, smelling of fresh soap. Recently showered. Another detail that clicked into place. "Let's get some sleep. Big brunch tomorrow." Jordan lay back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling while Amber's breathing eventually settled into the rhythm of sleep beside him. He didn't sleep. He cataloged everything instead. The timeline, the sounds, the casual confidence of her lie. The way she'd managed the entire evening like a carefully orchestrated performance. Morning arrived with bright Virginia sunshine streaming through the villa's windows. Jordan showered, dressed, and headed to the farewell brunch in the courtyard with the precise movements of a man operating on automatic pilot. His face gave nothing away as he thanked guests for coming, accepted congratulations, and played the role of satisfied newlywed. But he watched. He watched everything now with new eyes. Devante worked the crowd with his usual charm, laughing easily and clapping Jordan on the shoulder whenever they passed each other. But there was something else in his brother's manner. Not the shifty guilt of someone afraid of being caught, but the relaxed confidence of someone who believed he'd already won. When Devante looked at Jordan, there was almost pity in his eyes, as if Jordan was the one who didn't understand how the world really worked. Jordan noticed how Devante never quite looked directly at Amber, but always seemed to know exactly where she was in the room. How they maintained a careful distance that felt more deliberate than natural. Small details that would mean nothing to anyone else, but to Jordan's newly awakened awareness, they were like neon signs. As guests began departing, Jordan spotted Rita gathering her purse and overnight bag. She'd been quiet all morning, nursing what looked like a hangover, but felt like something heavier. Jordan approached her casually. "Rita, do you have a few minutes before you head out? I could use your help with something." She startled slightly but nodded. "Of course, Jordan." He led her to a quiet corner of the courtyard, choosing a table partially screened by potted palms. Rita sat down, her hands fidgeting with her bag strap. Jordan took the seat across from her and met her eyes directly. "How long has this been going on?" The question landed like a physical weight. Rita's face went pale, then flushed. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No words came out. "Rita." Jordan's voice remained gentle but firm. "I need to know." She looked down at her hands, then back up at him. Her lower lip trembled. "Jordan, just tell me the truth. That's all I'm asking for." 3 minutes. That's all it took for Rita's composure to crack completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks as 18 months of carried guilt finally found release. Jordan sat perfectly still, his face a mask of calm, as the full weight of the betrayal began to take shape in Rita's halting confession. Rita's hands trembled around the untouched coffee cup as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It started about 18 months ago. I found out by accident." Jordan sat perfectly still, his face composed. "Tell me how you found out." "I was helping Amber with some event planning work. She'd left her phone on the table while getting supplies, and a message from Devante popped up." Rita swallowed hard. "It was explicit. I confronted her that night." "What did she say?" "She cried. Said it had just happened, that she was confused." Rita's grip tightened on the cup. "But then she told me more. About how she and Devante had history before you." Jordan's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "Explain." "Devante pursued her first, before she ever met you. They went on a few dates, but nothing serious happened. Or that's what she told me." Rita paused, struggling. "Then you came into the picture, and she chose you. You were stable, successful, everything Devante wasn't. But he never really accepted that." "Go on." "He kept in touch with her. Little messages here and there. Nothing obvious at first. Then about 18 months ago, they ran into each other at some industry event you couldn't attend. And it just—" Rita's voice cracked. "It started that night." Jordan nodded slowly, processing. "What else did Amber tell you?" "She said Devante always claimed you'd taken her from him. That she was supposed to be his. That you'd swooped in with your nice house and good job and stolen what should have been his." Rita finally released the coffee cup, wiping her eyes. "I told her she had to end it. She promised she would after the wedding. She said she just needed time to figure out how to let him down gently, without causing family drama." "And you believed her?" "I wanted to." Rita's shoulders slumped. "I should have told you. I know that now. She was my best friend. I thought if I gave her time—" "It's done now," Jordan said quietly. "I'll need you to write down everything you've told me. Dates, details, conversations, Everything you can remember. Can you do that? Rita nodded quickly, relief flooding her face at being given a concrete task. Of course. When? I'll have my lawyer contact you next week. Jordan stood, straightening his jacket. Thank you for telling me the truth today, Rita. Jordan, she looked up at him, tears threatening again. What are you going to do? What needs to be done? He gave her a small, composed smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's all you need to know for now. The drive home that afternoon was quiet. Jordan had announced at brunch that they needed to postpone the honeymoon. A major project deadline had moved up unexpectedly. Amber had accepted this news with what looked like disappointment to others, but read as poorly concealed relief to Jordan's newly calibrated awareness. Now she sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone, occasionally making small talk about wedding gifts they'd received. Jordan responded appropriately, his voice pleasant and engaged, while his mind categorized every aspect of their shared life that Amber didn't fully understand. The house's deed solely in his name, the prenuptial agreement's morality clause her lawyer had dismissed as unenforceable, the separate accounts he'd maintained even after their engagement. They pulled into the driveway of the two-story colonial he'd purchased 3 years ago, before Amber had entered his life. She'd moved in 6 months ago, filling the space with her presence, but never truly establishing legal claim to it. Jordan watched through the rearview mirror as she pulled her suitcase from the trunk, noting how comfortable she looked walking up to their front door. She didn't know that comfort was temporary. She didn't know about Virginia's specific legal statutes regarding infidelity and property rights. She didn't know that Jordan had spent years learning contract law as part of his engineering career, or that he understood exactly how evidence needed to be presented to be legally actionable. He followed her inside, carrying his own bags, mentally noting every item she'd brought into his home and every joint purchase they'd made since the engagement. The catalog in his mind was precise, methodical, exactly like the structural surveys he conducted before beginning any major project. I'm going to take a shower, Amber announced, heading upstairs. Then maybe we can order in. Sounds perfect, Jordan replied warmly, already calculating how long it would take to document everything he needed before the first legal filing. The next morning, Jordan woke before sunrise, a habit ingrained from years of construction site schedules. He made coffee in silence, listening to Amber's soft breathing from upstairs. The kitchen table became his command center, his laptop open to a blank document that he began filling with methodical precision. First, he created a timeline. The wedding night incident went at the top, followed by Rita's revelation about the 18-month affair. He noted specific dates he could remember when Devante and Amber had been in the same city during his business trips. Each entry was clinical, detailed, stripped of emotion, exactly like his project logs at work. At 7:15 a.m., he sent a text to Wendell Ash. Need your help with some data extraction. Private matter. Can we meet? Wendell's response came within minutes. Whatever you need. Remember that time in senior year when you kept me from getting expelled? I still owe you. They arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop away from Jordan's usual spots. Wendell arrived in his typical IT contractor uniform, casual clothes that somehow still looked professional. He listened without interruption as Jordan explained what he needed. Location metadata from Amber's shared cloud photos, any GPS data from shared accounts, timestamp verification on specific dates. She never removed you from the family share? Wendell asked. No, she didn't think she needed to. That makes this completely legal then. Wendell nodded. Give me 3 days. I'll extract everything cleanly, format it so it holds up in court if needed. Jordan thanked him and left, driving straight to the offices of Patricia Odom's Family Law. The building was understated but professional, much like Patricia herself, a woman in her 50s who radiated competence without flash. Show me what you have, she said, after Jordan explained his situation. He laid out his initial documentation, the timeline, Rita's pending statement, the restaurant receipt he'd photographed, his notes about patterns of absence. Patricia reviewed everything with sharp attention, occasionally making notes. "There's more coming," Jordan explained. "IT data extraction, location records." Patricia nodded, then pulled out a copy of Jordan's prenuptial agreement. "Your wife's attorney dismissed the morality clause in Section 4.3 as unenforceable. That was a mistake." She tapped the page. "Under Virginia Code Section 20107.3, with proper documentation of infidelity, this clause is completely valid, especially given that the infidelity appears to have occurred before, during, and immediately after the ceremony itself." Jordan absorbed this. "What do I need to do?" "First, protect your assets. Immediately." Patricia pulled out a checklist. "Close any joint accounts that haven't fully processed. Stop any pending property amendments. Move your personal assets to new accounts at different banks. Do it all within the next 48 hours. Jordan spent the rest of the day executing Patricia's checklist. He visited 3 different banks, speaking with managers in hushed tones, explaining just enough to ensure cooperation. He contacted his property lawyer and halted the deed amendment that would have added Amber's name to his house. It hadn't been filed yet, was still sitting in the processing queue. That evening, he returned home and ate dinner with Amber as if nothing had changed. She talked about starting her events business, about using some of their joint resources to seed the initial funding. Jordan nodded supportively, noting how she spoke about his assets as if they were already hers to access. "Have you thought more about the honeymoon?" she asked. "Maybe we could reschedule for next month." "Let me check the project timeline," Jordan replied, his voice warm and engaged. "I want to make sure we have enough time to do it right." The next morning, he met Patricia again, this time with completed paperwork for the first phase of asset separation. She reviewed everything, nodding with approval at his thoroughness. "You've moved quickly but carefully," she observed. "That's exactly right. Most clients let emotion drive them to rush or hesitate. You've done neither." Jordan nodded, signing where she indicated. "I'm an engineer. We build things step by step. Make sure each layer is solid before adding the next." Patricia gathered the signed documents, extending her hand. "We'll file these today. The next step will be gathering the metadata evidence, then preparing for formal proceedings. Are you ready?" Jordan shook her hand firmly, feeling the quiet certainty of someone who had laid a proper foundation. "Yes," he said simply, standing to leave. "I'm ready." The evening sun had already set when Jordan opened Wendell's email in his office. The building was empty, most employees gone for hours, leaving only the soft hum of the HVAC system and distant traffic below. He clicked the attachment, entering the secure password Wendell had texted separately. The metadata report opened with a simple timeline: dates, locations, timestamps. Each entry was color-coded for verification level. Green for multiple confirmations, yellow for strong probability, red for inconclusive. Almost everything was green. Jordan leaned forward, scrolling slowly. 8 separate occasions spread across 18 months materialized in precise digital clarity. March 15th. Amber's phone located at a restaurant in Richmond, where Devante had posted a social media check-in. May 22nd. Both phones pinging off the same cell tower in Virginia Beach for 3 hours. July 8th. Shared location data, putting them at the same hotel in Maryland. Each date aligned perfectly with periods when Jordan had been away on project sites. Times he'd called to check in, hearing Amber's voice, bright and casual, telling him she missed him. He remembered specific conversations, now layered with new context. Her mentioning dinner with girlfriends on dates her phone placed her with Devante. Casual references to shopping trips that mapped to hotel locations. The precision of it struck him. Not just the betrayal itself, but the careful scheduling around his absences. The deliberate exploitation of his trust in both of them. His own project management skills reflected back at him through a twisted mirror. They had treated his predictable reliability as a resource to be leveraged. Then he reached the final entry. Jordan's hands stilled on the mouse. The timestamp was 2:15 p.m. on the day before his wedding. While he had been at Belhaven Villa directing vendors, checking sound equipment, ensuring everything was perfect, Amber's phone placed her at the Riverside Inn, 40 minutes away. The hotel where, according to a cross-referenced receipt, Devante had checked in the previous afternoon. She had been with his brother hours before their wedding, hours before standing at that altar, hours before making vows she had already broken. Jordan sat back in his chair, the office darkness pressing in around his computer screen's glow. He thought about her rehearsed vows, polished and performance-ready, while his had been raw and real. He thought about the way she'd smiled during them, that smile that had never quite reached her eyes. For 2 hours, he sat completely still, processing not just the fact of the betrayal, but its architecture, the way it had been built on his own trustworthiness, his predictability, his willingness to explain away small inconsistencies. They had used his best qualities as tools against him. At 9:45 p.m., he picked up his phone and called Paulette. His mother answered on the second ring. "Jordan, you're calling late." "Mom," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something. And I need you to just listen first." There was a slight pause. Then, "Go ahead, baby." He told her everything. The wedding night, Rita's confession, the metadata confirmation, the hotel the day before the ceremony. He delivered it all in the same measured tone he used for project reports, letting the facts speak for themselves. When he finished, Paulette was silent for a long moment. Then she asked, simply, "What do you need me to do?" The directness of it, the immediate shift to support without drama, made his throat tight. "Just be ready," he said. "I'll need your help soon." After hanging up, Jordan took 3 deep breaths before making the second call. Uncle Harold answered with his usual gravity. "Jordan, everything all right?" "Uncle Harold, I need you at a family dinner this Saturday. Something's come out that you need to hear in person." Harold, who had helped raise both brothers after their father left, who had co-signed Devante's business loans and vouched for him repeatedly, didn't ask for details. He simply said, "What time?" Jordan gave him the details, ended the call, and placed his phone face down on his desk. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the office ceiling, letting the silence settle around him. The HVAC hummed. Traffic moved below. Somewhere in the city, his wife and brother were living lives built on the assumption that he would never know, never see, never act. He kept staring at the ceiling, perfectly still, as the final pieces of his response settled into place in his mind. The next morning, Jordan woke at his usual time of 6 a.m. He moved through his morning routine with practiced precision, making coffee, reading the news on his tablet, starting a load of laundry before his shower. When Amber came downstairs at 7:15, he was already dressed for work, his suit pressed and tie perfectly knotted. "Morning," he said, sliding a cup of coffee across the counter to her, the way he always did. "Thanks," she smiled, taking the cup. If there was any tension in her shoulders, any hint that she carried the weight of deception, it didn't show. She had mastered this performance long ago. Jordan watched her over his own coffee cup, studying the ease with which she moved through their kitchen. How many mornings had they done this? How many times had she left their home to meet Devante, then returned to this same routine as if nothing had happened? "I was thinking," he said casually, "we should do something with family this weekend. Mom mentioned wanting to have us over for dinner Saturday. Just immediate family. Something small to celebrate." Amber's face brightened. "That sounds nice. Your mom's been so sweet since the wedding." "She has," Jordan agreed, keeping his voice warm and steady. He sent the text to Devante after Amber left for work. "Mom wants to do a small toast Saturday night. Just family. 7 p.m. You should be there." Devante's response came quickly. "Wouldn't miss it, little bro." Jordan spent his lunch hour with Rita at a quiet cafe across town, well away from anywhere Amber or Devante might appear. Rita's hands shook slightly as she signed the written statement he'd prepared, detailing everything she knew about the affair, its duration, specific incidents she'd witnessed, conversations with Amber, the original revelation that Devante had pursued Amber first. "I'm so sorry," Rita whispered, pushing the signed papers back to him. "I should have told you before the wedding." Jordan folded the statement carefully and placed it in his folder. "You're telling me now," he said simply. "That's what matters." That evening, he printed everything from his office after hours. The metadata logs Wendell had compiled, showing 18 months of overlapping locations, the restaurant receipt in Devante's name, the hotel records from the day before the wedding. He arranged each document chronologically, building the story piece by piece, leaving no room for denial or reinterpretation. At home, Amber chatted about her day over dinner, mentioning weekend plans with the same easy confidence she'd maintained for months. Jordan responded naturally, asked the right questions, showed the right interest. Inside, he felt a strange detachment, as if watching the scene from outside himself. The careful construction of her lies next to the careful construction of his response. Two people performing different plays on the same stage. He drove to Paulette's house Friday morning before work, bringing coffee and the essential information she needed. He showed her the key documents, but not everything. Just enough so she would understand the gravity of what would unfold in her home the next evening. "Harold will be here," he told her. "I need you to let me handle it. Don't say anything until I open the folder." Paulette's face was composed, but her eyes held a deep sadness. Not just for Jordan, but for both her sons, one who had betrayed, one who had been betrayed. "I'll be ready," she said simply, squeezing his hand. That night, Jordan sat at his desk after Amber had gone to bed. The house was quiet, except for the soft whir of the ceiling fan. He opened the folder one last time, verifying each document was in place, each piece of evidence arranged in the order he needed. The metadata logs, Rita's statement, the restaurant receipt, the hotel records, the timeline he'd constructed, mapping every lie against its corresponding truth. He ran his finger along the edge of the papers, feeling the weight of what they represented. Not just evidence of betrayal, but proof of calculation, of deliberate choices made over months and years, of trust weaponized against itself. Jordan closed the folder with a soft snap and placed it in his leather bag. He sat back in his chair, listening to the quiet of the house he'd bought, that he'd shared, that he'd made into a home. Tomorrow would change everything. But tonight, in this moment, he simply sat still, letting the silence wrap around him like a familiar coat. The living room in Paulette's home held the same warm familiarity it always had. Family photos arranged carefully on the walls, the comfortable worn leather sofa, the soft yellow lamplight. But tonight, the air felt different, heavier. Harold sat in his usual armchair, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. He nodded once when Jordan entered, a slight gesture that carried the weight of understanding. Jordan placed the leather folder on the side table with deliberate care, then kissed his mother's cheek. Paulette's hands were steady as she adjusted a throw pillow, her movements measured and precise. "Coffee's fresh," she said simply, but didn't move to pour any. They all knew no one would be drinking it. The doorbell chimed at exactly 7 p.m. Amber's voice carried from the entryway, bright and clear. "Something smells amazing." Her heels clicked against the hardwood as she rounded the corner into the living room, still wrapped in the confidence of someone who believed they understood the evening ahead. She wore the pearl earrings Jordan had given her for their first anniversary, and something in his chest tightened at the sight. The second chime came 3 minutes later. Devante's footsteps were heavier, his laugh preceding him down the hallway. That same laugh Jordan had heard through the bridal suite door. "Ma, you hiding in here?" "I brought that wine, you—" The moment stretched like pulled glass. Devante stopped in the doorway. Amber's smile froze mid-gesture. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second before they could catch themselves. A reflexive glance loaded with recognition, panic, and something else. Something practiced. Jordan watched the micro-expressions flicker across their faces. The slight widening of Amber's eyes. The almost imperceptible tension in Devante's jaw. Guilt had a language all its own, and they were suddenly both speaking it fluently. Jordan didn't stand. He reached for the folder with the same calm precision he brought to every blueprint review, every structural analysis. "Sit down," he said quietly. "Both of you." Devante recovered first, sliding into an easy smile. "What's going on, little brother? This feels serious." "It is." Jordan removed the first document, the restaurant receipt from Richmond. He placed it in the center of the coffee table. 6 months ago, dinner for two at Laurent's, the restaurant Amber told me she'd never been to. He looked at his wife. "You remember telling me that?" Amber's face paled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. "Jordan, I can explain." He placed the second document down. "Hotel records, the afternoon before our wedding." His voice remained measured, almost clinical. "While I was setting up the venue, you were 40 minutes away. Same hotel where Devante checked in the day before." Another document. "Location data from your shared cloud account. 8 separate meetings over 18 months, all while I was on job sites." "Brother, listen." Devante leaned forward, spreading his hands in a gesture of openness. "This isn't what you think. We were just planning the contracting venture?" Jordan laid down the timeline he'd constructed. "Or was that just the excuse you used when you needed to explain being seen together? Rita's statement is here too. She told me everything." Amber's composure cracked. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she reached for Jordan's hand. "Please, Jordan, I love you. We can work through this." Jordan moved his hand away, his motion precise and final. 18 months, Amber, including our wedding day." Devante shifted strategies, his voice dropping into the familiar cadence of shared history. "Jordan, we're blood. We're family. Whatever this is, whatever you think this is, we can handle it as brothers, like we always have." Jordan met his eyes directly. "Like brothers?" He placed the final document on the table, the metadata log from the wedding night, time-stamped 12:08 a.m. "I heard you through the window. I heard her say your name. That's not how brothers handle anything." Paulette sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her silence filling the room like smoke. She didn't look at Devante, didn't reach to comfort either of her sons. Her stillness spoke volumes that no words could have captured. Harold stood slowly, straightening his jacket. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried the weight of decades of earned authority. "Devante," he said, each word measured and final, "you are no longer my nephew, in any way that matters." He paused, letting the words land. "The contracting cosign is withdrawn. Permanently." Another beat. "I don't want to see you at family gatherings. If you show up, I'll leave." He crossed to Jordan, extended his hand. They shook once, firmly. Then Harold walked out, his footsteps fading down the hallway. Jordan turned to Amber, his voice businesslike now. "Patricia Odom's family law. Here's her card and office address." He slid it across the table. "You have 30 days to vacate the house per the legal filing already in motion. She'll explain the rest." The consequences moved like slow water through both their lives, methodical and unstoppable. Amber's attorney advised against contesting the prenup, but she insisted. The hearing took less than 2 hours. Patricia Odoms presented each piece of evidence with surgical precision. The metadata logs showing Amber's phone at the hotel 40 minutes from Belhaven Villa the afternoon before the wedding. The restaurant receipts spanning 18 months. Rita's notarized statement detailing the timeline and confrontations. The morality clause, dismissed as unenforceable during the prenup signing, held firmly under Virginia law. The judge's ruling was unambiguous. Amber packed her clothes, her personal items, and the few pieces of furniture she'd brought into the marriage. The movers arrived on a Tuesday morning. She watched them load everything into a small truck, then stood in the driveway of the house she'd thought would be hers, holding a box of bathroom items and fighting back tears. The neighbors didn't wave. They'd already heard. Her parents' two-bedroom house in Richmond hadn't changed since high school. The same floral wallpaper, the same cramped kitchen where her mother made coffee every morning, the same narrow twin bed in her old room. At 32, Amber unpacked her designer clothes into the closet she'd once filled with prom dresses. Her mother didn't ask questions. She just made extra coffee. The professional collapse was slower but equally complete. The events coordination business she'd been quietly planning had hinged entirely on access to Jordan's resources. Not just his finances, but his network. The civil engineering firm's holiday party she'd been set to coordinate canceled with a polite email. The corporate retreats she'd lined up through Jordan's professional contacts, those evaporated too. One by one, the clients she'd cultivated through their engagement period stepped back. No one was rude. No one mentioned why. They simply stopped returning calls. Her social media following, built substantially on being Jordan Cole's wife, dwindled as the circumstances of the divorce spread. Not through gossip, through documentation. That was the worst part. There were no rumors to deny, no narrative to reshape. There were only facts, dates, and receipts. The shame of it followed her into every room. She was the woman who'd spent her wedding night in her husband's brother's bed and lost everything because of it. Devontae's unraveling moved on a parallel track. The bank's rejection letter was brief and final. Without Harold's co-signature, the contracting loan was declined. The vendors he'd been courting, the suppliers he'd promised business to, the subcontractors he'd started scheduling, all of it depended on capital he no longer had access to. His phone stopped ringing. Emails went unanswered. The family withdrawal was quieter but cut deeper. No one announced anything. No one had to. Harold's word carried the weight of law in their circles, and his position was clear. The Sunday dinners Devontae had taken for granted stopped. The casual drop-ins at cousins' houses weren't welcomed anymore. His mother's kitchen, always open before, felt suddenly foreign. 2 months after the dinner, Devontae showed up at his cousin Marcus's birthday gathering. He walked in carrying a gift bag and his usual easy smile. The room didn't empty. That would have been easier to handle. Instead, it shifted around him like water around a stone. Conversations continued but grew shorter. People were polite, proper, and brief. No one was hostile. They simply found reasons to be elsewhere, drifting to other rooms with casual excuses that all meant the same thing. You don't belong here anymore. He left after 30 minutes, the gift bag still in his hand. He didn't try another family event. Amber sat in her childhood bedroom that same evening, surrounded by boxes she hadn't bothered to unpack. She stared at her phone. No notifications, no client emails, no RSVPs to events she wasn't planning anymore. The life she'd thought she was building had been a house of cards, and Jordan had pulled out the foundation with quiet, devastating precision. Across town, Devontae sat alone in his apartment, the bank's rejection letter on his coffee table. He'd spent years telling himself that Jordan was the boring one, the predictable one, the brother who didn't know how to really live. Now he understood. Jordan hadn't been blind. He'd been watching, building, waiting, and when he finally moved, he'd taken everything they thought they'd won. They'd both gambled everything on the assumption that Jordan Cole would never see what was right in front of him. They'd been wrong, and being wrong had cost them everything they were reaching for. 14 months passed like water under a well-built bridge. Jordan sat at his desk, morning light streaming through the office windows, reviewing the final blueprints for the Chesapeake Regional Bridge project. His name stood clear at the bottom, Senior Project Lead, Jordan Cole. Not a title earned through shortcuts or connections, but through the same steady competence that had carried him this far. He traced his finger along the foundation calculations, double-checking load distributions and stress points. The project would connect 3 communities and carry thousands of lives daily. The responsibility sat comfortably on his shoulders. This was the work he was built for, creating structures people could trust without having to think about why. "These look solid," Sarah from the engineering team said, leaning over his desk to examine the plans. "Your revisions to the soil anchoring system. That's going to save us headaches down the line." Jordan nodded, appreciating her attention to detail. The whole team operated this way now. Thorough, careful, no corners cut. His standards had become their standards. Trust, earned slowly and maintained carefully. His new apartment sat 20 minutes from the office, a clean-lined space with good natural light and windows that faced east. He'd chosen everything himself. The minimal furniture, the quiet color scheme, the carefully arranged workspace where he reviewed projects in the early mornings. No rushed decisions, no compromises, just the steady assembly of a life that fit him exactly. There was a woman, Rebecca, a structural engineer from another firm. They'd been having dinner every couple of weeks for the past few months. Nothing announced, nothing rushed. She understood numbers the way he did, spoke the language of load-bearing weights and foundation depths. Last week over pasta, she'd asked him directly, "What are you looking for, Jordan?" He'd considered the question with the same care he gave his calculation. "Steadiness," he'd said finally. She'd nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. They'd finished dinner talking about concrete cure times and the poetry of well-designed support systems. Sunday afternoon found him on Paulette's back porch, a plate of her famous pot roast in front of him. The air carried the weight of late summer, thick with the smell of her garden herbs. She didn't mention Amber or Devante, hadn't in months. Instead, she asked about the bridge project, settling into her favorite chair, with the attention of someone who'd been listening to her son's work for decades. "The foundation survey came back better than expected," Jordan explained, cutting into the perfectly tender meat. "But we're still reinforcing beyond minimum requirements. The soil shifts more than people realize during seasonal changes." "You always did pay attention to what's underneath," Paulette said, her voice carrying the warm certainty of a mother who'd watched her son build himself piece by piece. Jordan walked her through the load calculations, the distributed weight systems, the redundant safety features that would keep thousands safe without them ever knowing why. She listened the way she always had, like what he said mattered, like she'd always known he'd be the one standing. The conversation drifted to his work team, to the new project bids coming in, to the quiet rhythm his life had found. Not once did they need to discuss what was missing. Nothing was missing. As he stood to leave, Paulette squeezed his hand and said with a small smile, "I told you something felt off that night." Jordan laughed, a real laugh, loose and unbothered, the kind that came from a place where old wounds had healed clean. The sound carried across her back porch like proof of something rebuilt stronger. The next morning, Jordan spread the bridge blueprints across his kitchen table, early sun catching the crisp edges of the pages. Each calculation, each support beam, each load-bearing column represented something he understood in his bones. Some structures look solid until the day they don't. The difference between a man who builds and a man who pretends to is simply this. One of them checked the foundation before he signed his name to it. He knew now. He would always check. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.